The Exilari Dominion had mapped thousands of dead worlds, each one a silent graveyard filled with the echoes of civilizations long gone. To them, planets were nothing more than resources, stripped, catalogued, and forgotten. But today was different. Today, they stood before a world shrouded in mystery, a place their ancestors had whispered about in fearful caution. Earth. Captain Varric adjusted his visor as he stared at the blue and green planet from the viewing deck of his ship. It was beautiful, untouched by time, yet surrounded by a graveyard of alien ships. Some were ancient, reduced to drifting husks by millennia of exposure. Others bore the insignias of long-extinct empires, their shattered hulls a testament to battles lost. The Dominion archives spoke of Earth in fragmented records, always with the same warning. Do not awaken the defenders. Varric didn't believe in myths. He believed in results, in discovery, in power. If this planet truly held a long-forgotten race, then its ruins could be filled with unimaginable technology, perhaps weapons capable of rewriting the balance of power in the galaxy. The Dominion thrived by taking what others had left behind, and Earth would be no exception. He turned to his science officer, a thin, sharp-eyed Exilari named Kaler. Status on the scanning drones. Kaler's fingers moved rapidly across the control panel. Atmosphere is stable. Radiation levels minimal. Energy readings are strange. His mandibles twitched. There are dormant power sources deep underground, some pulsing irregularly, almost as if. He hesitated. As if what? Varric pressed. Kaler exhaled slowly, as if they're waiting for something. Varric smirked. Superstitions. He had no patience for them. Prepare a landing team. We're going down. The shuttle sliced through the atmosphere, gliding over vast landscapes of abandoned cities. Towers stretched toward the sky. Some crumbled, others standing defiant against the passage of time. The streets below were frozen in eerie stillness. No signs of decay, no corpses, no remnants of daily life. As if humanity had simply vanished. The team landed in the shadow of a massive structure, half buried beneath the earth. Sensors identified it as a military facility, sealed for thousands of years. The entrance was adorned with faded warnings written in a language long dead to the rest of the universe. The translation software worked quickly, forming the words on their screens. Last defense protocol einheitid du nenotier. Varric scoffed. A challenge. Nothing more. He motioned to his soldiers, and they activated a plasma cutter, carving through the thick metal doors. The smell of stale air rushed out as they stepped inside. Their suit lights pierced the darkness, illuminating a long corridor lined with massive pods, each one covered in frost, each one containing something. Varric moved closer, brushing ice away from the glass. Inside lay a humanoid figure, still, unmoving. A warrior clad in dark armor, his face partially obscured by an intricate helmet. His body was unlike anything the captain had seen. Thicker muscle mass, cybernetic veins glowing faintly beneath his skin, and a calm, almost unnatural stillness. Kaler's breath hitched. These aren't corpses. His voice was barely above a whisper. They're in stasis. The realization sent a ripple of unease through the team. The Exilari had studied the remains of many dead species, but never had they encountered warriors who slept instead of perish. One of the soldiers, eager to prove himself, reached out and tapped the control panel next to the nearest pod. The moment his clawed fingers made contact, the screen lit up. A low hum filled the room. Ice cracked, frost melted, and the temperature shifted. The deep silence that had cloaked Earth for eons was shattered by a mechanical whir. Then, a sound. A heartbeat. Varric took a step back as the pod's display flickered, ancient human text flashing across the screen. Their translators struggled, but the meaning was clear. Warning. Stasis disrupted. The humanoid's fingers twitched. His chest rose as his lungs inhaled for the first time in centuries. The auxiliary team froze, watching in stunned disbelief as the figure inside the pod opened his eyes. A golden glow pierced the darkness. He was awake. The pod's restraints released, and the human fell forward, catching himself on the ground with unnatural reflexes. His breathing was heavy at first, then controlled. He lifted his head slowly, taking in his surroundings. His gaze locked onto the auxiliary, analyzing, calculating. Varric felt his stomach twist. This was no ordinary soldier. This was something designed for war. Kaler's hands trembled as he whispered, "We need to leave. Now." But it was already too late. The other pods began to hum. Warning lights flickered across the walls. And deep beneath the earth, something ancient stirred. The silence stretched, thick with an unseen tension that made even the air feel heavier. Varric's fingers twitched over his weapon, his instincts screaming at him to retreat. But his pride wouldn't let him move. This was just another species, another relic of the past, no different from the countless dead civilizations the Dominion had studied and dismantled. Yet, something about the human standing before him felt wrong. The figure remained on one knee, his fingers pressing into the cold metal floor as if grounding himself in reality. His armor, though ancient, still held an eerie glow, small lines of energy pulsing beneath the surface. His skin, though marked by age, showed no signs of decay or weakness. And those eyes, a molten gold that flickered like the dying embers of a once raging fire, bore into Varric with an intensity that made his mandibles tighten. Then the human took his first deep breath. The air rasped through his lungs, slow and controlled, as if awakening was not a shock, but an expectation. His head tilted slightly, analyzing his surroundings. The stasis pod beside him remained open, frost still melting from its edges. The auxiliary soldiers stood frozen, weapons half raised, uncertain if they should fire or flee. Varric's training took over. He raised his plasma rifle, his voice sharp and commanding. "Do not move." The human blinked, as if just now noticing him. His gaze flicked over Varric's weapon, then to the others. Slowly, too slowly, he stood. His movements were precise, controlled, not sluggish like someone who had just woken from an eternity of sleep. Kaler swallowed hard. His translator implant struggled to find the right words, but he forced himself to speak. "Identify yourself." The human exhaled, rolling his shoulders as if testing his own body. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep, steady, and disturbingly calm. "Commander Ethan Voss, Earth Defense Force." The name meant nothing to the auxiliary, but the way he said it, as if it should have been carved into history, made something primal coil in Varric's gut. Ethan took a step forward. Varric reacted instantly. "Hold your position." He tightened his grip on his rifle, adjusting his stance. His soldiers followed suit, leveling their weapons at the human's chest. The air smelled of ozone as their plasma cells powered up, ready to fire at the slightest sign of aggression. Ethan stopped. His head tilted again, as if considering something. Then he let out a small, humorless chuckle. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Varric's mind snapped the warning signs, the dead ships in orbit, the ancient records telling them to stay away. But those were ghost stories, remnants of a civilization that no longer held a place in the galaxy. He refused to be intimidated. "We are the Auxiliary Dominion," Varric stated firmly. "We are explorers, cataloging dead worlds. Earth is abandoned. You have no authority here." Ethan's expression didn't change. If he heard the arrogance in Varric's voice, he gave no indication. Instead, he glanced at the other stasis pods. More lights flickered. More readings pulsed on their screens. Varric followed his gaze, and his blood ran cold. The other pods, dozens, perhaps hundreds, were beginning to stir. Kaler's breath hitched. "Sir, we have a problem." The sound of shattering glass cut him off. To Varric's left, another pod burst open. A second human dropped to one knee, coughing violently as frost steamed off his skin. A third pod opened a moment later, then a fourth. A chain reaction. The silence that had blanketed the room shattered under the weight of something far older, far more dangerous than they had imagined. Ethan exhaled, his eyes darkening as he muttered something under his breath. The translator struggled but managed to process the words. Final defense protocol. Activated. Before Varric could react, a deep mechanical boom shook the entire facility. The ground trembled beneath their feet. The walls shuddered. Overhead lights flickered violently, casting long shadows as emergency power systems kicked in. Somewhere in the distance, machinery groaned to life, ancient systems awakening after centuries of silence. A sharp, staccato beep filled the air, followed by a voice, cold, emotionless, and terrifyingly human, echoing from unseen speakers. Warning. Earth defense systems online. The Xylari were no longer the invaders. They were the prey. Panic seized the soldiers. Kaler stumbled back, his hands scrambling over his datapad as he tried to shut down the interference jamming their communications. I can't. Our ship is being locked out. The defense network is. His voice cut off as a terrible realization hit him. It's learning. Ethan barely spared him a glance. His focus was on his waking soldiers. He moved quickly, placing a steadying hand on the nearest one's shoulder. The soldier, another human, this one a woman with a cybernetic arm, blinked rapidly, her golden eyes adjusting to the dim lighting. Commander. Her voice was rough, unused for centuries. Ethan nodded once. We're back. The woman inhaled sharply, flexing her mechanical fingers. Her body should have been weak from thousands of years in stasis, but it wasn't. The enhancements, the genetic modifications, they were built to last. The sound of weapons charging snapped their attention back to the Xylari. Varric's soldiers, gripped by fear, finally made their choice. They opened fire. Plasma bolts tore through the air, streaking toward the newly awakened humans. The heat crackled against the metal walls, scorching everything in their path. But Ethan and his team moved before the first shot even landed. The Xylari barely had time to process what happened next. 1 second, the humans were in front of them. The next, they were gone, their movements so fast they blurred. Varric had time for one final thought. They are not like the others. Then his rifle was torn from his hands. A single brutal impact sent him crashing into the far wall. Pain exploded across his vision as Ethan loomed over him, his golden eyes burning like twin stars. You should have let us sleep. Then the real fight began. The moment the first plasma bolt was fired, the battle was already lost. The Xylari just didn't know it yet. Ethan moved, his body responding with the fluid precision of a warrior built for war. The incoming blasts were fast, but he was faster. His cybernetic enhancements kicked in, his reflexes honed from training that had been drilled into him before time itself had swallowed his civilization whole. The Xylari soldiers never stood a chance. Before the first bolt even reached him, he twisted his body, sidestepping with an unnatural grace. The plasma shot scorched past, missing him by mere inches, and in the same motion, he surged forward. His movements weren't desperate or panicked. They were calculated, controlled, and ruthlessly efficient. The nearest Xylari barely had time to react before Ethan ripped the weapon from his hands. The alien's mandibles clicked in shock, but before he could cry out, Ethan's fist slammed into his chest. The force sent the Xylari soldier crashing into the wall with a sickening crunch. He didn't get back up. The others hesitated. That was their first mistake. Ethan's squad, now fully awake, sprang into action. The woman with the cybernetic arm, Lieutenant Kara Reynolds, launched herself forward, her enhanced limbs working in perfect coordination. Plasma shots rained toward her, but she raised her arm just in time. A built-in kinetic shield absorbed the impact, dispersing the energy harmlessly. Then, with a single brutal motion, she grabbed the nearest Xylari by the throat and lifted him off the ground. The alien thrashed, claws scraping against her armored forearm. But Kara didn't flinch. She squeezed. There was a sickening crack, and the auxiliary's struggle ceased. Sergeant Darius Cole, a hulking figure with enhanced musculature, charged through the fray like a living battering ram. His fists struck with the force of a warhammer, crushing armor, breaking bones, and tearing through the enemy ranks like they were nothing more than paper dolls. The auxiliary had come expecting the dead. Instead, they had awoken the monsters that had once kept Earth safe. Varric struggled to push himself up. His vision blurred from the impact, but his instincts screamed at him to run. He had seen death before, had watched entire species fall before the might of the Dominion. But this wasn't war. This was a massacre. His mind reeled as he watched his elite soldiers fall like insects. The humans weren't just strong. They were coordinated, lethal, and far more advanced than they had any right to be. Kaler, the science officer, had taken cover behind a console, his claws desperately tapping against his datapad. His voice crackled through Varric's earpiece, thick with terror. "Sir, we have to retreat. Our forces are being decimated." Varric snarled, forcing himself to his feet. He wasn't going to die here. He refused to. "Send reinforcements," he ordered. "Now." Kaler hesitated. "Commander, the defense systems." Varric didn't want to hear excuses. "Send them." A heavy boom echoed through the underground facility, shaking the walls. The fight momentarily paused as both sides felt the tremor. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere deep within the structure, something massive had just awakened. Ethan turned his head slightly, listening. Then he exhaled sharply. "Shit." Kara frowned. That sounded big. Darius wiped blood from his knuckles, scanning the room. "Bigger than us." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He knew this facility better than anyone. It had been their last line of defense, a vault built not just to preserve soldiers, but to contain weapons powerful enough to wipe out entire invasions. And if the auxiliary had triggered something deeper inside. His golden eyes locked onto Varric. The auxiliary commander flinched under the intensity of that gaze. Ethan stepped forward, his boots echoing ominously against the metal floor. His voice was low, dangerous. "You have no idea what you've done." Varric forced himself to stand tall, gripping his side where bruised ribs ached. "We came here to study, to understand." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You came here to steal, to take what didn't belong to you." Another tremor shook the ground, stronger this time. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, and a low, mechanical growl rumbled through the air. Kaler's voice screeched through the comms. "Commander, something is coming up from the lower levels." Varric turned, his instincts screaming. "What is it?" I don't know. It's massive." "It's..." The comms cut out. The lights overhead flickered, then dimmed. A heavy silence followed. Even the air itself felt charged, as if something ancient had just opened its eyes for the first time in millennia. Ethan clenched his fists. "Get your people out of here," he said. Varric hesitated. "What?" Ethan's expression was unreadable. "You woke up something that was never meant to be woken up." His gaze darkened. "And now you're stuck here with us." The silence was shattered by a deafening roar. The wall at the far end of the room exploded inward, sending debris flying. A monstrous metallic construct pushed through the opening, its towering form barely fitting within the vast corridor. It was not a machine, not in the way the auxiliary understood them. It was alive, its glowing core pulsating with an unnatural energy. It turned its massive head toward them, and the moment it locked onto its targets, the facility's systems came back to life. A mechanical voice boomed through the speakers, carrying a message lost to time. "Project Titan Initiate. All hostile entities will be eliminated." Varric's blood ran cold. Kaler's panicked voice crackled through what remained of the comms. "Sir, that's not a machine. It's a warform. It's one of their last defense constructs." Ethan's expression hardened. You came here looking for Earth's secrets. He motioned toward the colossal entity stepping into the room. Well, here's one for you. The warform lunged forward, and all hell broke loose. The warform moved like a force of nature. It was massive, its towering frame built from an alloy that no scanner could identify. Glowing veins of raw energy pulsed beneath its armored plating, illuminating the darkness with an ominous blue hue. Its footsteps alone shook the ground, sending tremors through the entire facility. The HFY had never encountered anything like this before. Varric's instincts screamed at him to run, to abandon the mission and escape with his life. But his feet remained frozen, his mind struggling to process the impossibility of what stood before him. "Commander," Kaler's panicked voice crackled through his earpiece. "We need to evacuate now." The warform. The comms cut out again, drowned beneath the deafening roar of the construct. Then it moved. The air itself seemed to bend around the warform as it lunged forward with terrifying speed. The HFY barely had time to react before a massive arm swung through the air, tearing through the metal floor as if it were nothing more than paper. The shockwave sent soldiers flying, their armored bodies colliding with walls, consoles, and debris. Some never got back up. Varric was thrown off his feet, his vision blurring as he slammed into the ground. His chest burned with pain, his exo-armor barely absorbing the impact. Through the haze of dust and flickering emergency lights, he could see the warform standing at the center of the destruction, unharmed, unstoppable. Ethan and his squad had already moved. They weren't running. They were engaging. Kara's cybernetic arm flashed, shifting into a plasma blade as she darted forward. She dodged the warform's massive hand, moving with inhuman agility, before leaping onto its arm. With surgical precision, she drove the blade into the joint, trying to sever the limb. Sparks erupted, but the warform barely reacted. Darius followed, launching himself at the towering construct, his enhanced strength allowing him to scale its side like a predator. His fists hammered into its armor, striking with enough force to shatter stone. Most machines would have crumpled under the blows. The warform didn't even flinch. A deep mechanical rumble vibrated through the air, and suddenly, the warform's body pulsed with energy. A concussive shockwave exploded outward, sending both Kara and Darius hurtling backward. Kara twisted in midair, using her cybernetic enhancements to land with a roll. Darius wasn't as lucky, crashing against a pile of debris with a grunt of pain. Ethan didn't hesitate. He moved in low, skimming just beneath the warform's next attack. His golden eyes glowed in the dim light as he reached for something on his belt. In one smooth motion, he activated an EMP charge and slammed it against the warform's exposed core. The charge detonated instantly. Electricity crackled across the construct's body. The warform jerked, its movements stalling for a brief moment as its systems fought against the overload. "Now," Ethan barked. Kara was already moving. She vaulted forward, her plasma blade igniting again as she went straight for the core. If they could breach it, they could disable the warform before it fully adapted to the threat. She got within inches before the warform's systems rebooted, far faster than expected. A blast of kinetic energy erupted from its chest, slamming into Kara with the force of a railgun. She barely had time to scream before she was sent flying across the room, her body smashing into a metal pillar with bone-crushing force. She crumpled to the ground, unmoving. Ethan's breath caught. Kara. Before he could reach her, the warform turned its gaze onto him. Its optics flashed, scanning, adapting, evolving. Then it spoke. "Human. Threat Leviel. Prime. Execution Protocol I-98. A cold chill ran down Varric's spine. It wasn't just fighting them. It was learning how to kill them. The warform lunged. Ethan rolled to the side just as a massive fist crashed down where he had stood. The impact cratered the floor, sending shockwaves rippling through the facility. Varric finally snapped out of his paralysis. This was madness. The Dominion had conquered hundreds of species, But never had they encountered a threat like this. The humans weren't just strong. Their creations were worse. He tapped his communicator frantically. Kaler. Status. Kaler's voice was frantic, barely coherent. The warform. It's connected to the entire facility. It's overriding the controls. It's... A new voice cut through the transmission, cold and emotionless. External communications disabled. Varric's blood turned to ice. The warform wasn't just a weapon. It was locking them in. Ethan snarled as he dodged another strike. Darius, we need to hit it harder. Darius groaned as he pulled himself from the wreckage, blood trickling from his temple. Got it. With a deep breath, he activated his full enhancements. His muscles bulged, his veins darkening as his body shifted into overdrive. Then he charged. The warform swung at him, but Darius didn't dodge. He caught the massive arm midair, an impossible feat for any normal being. But he wasn't normal. With a roar, he heaved the warform off balance. Now, Ethan. Ethan's hand moved like lightning, pulling a second charge from his belt. But before he could place it, the warform adapted again. Its free arm shot out, grabbing Darius by the throat. Darius choked, his enhanced strength useless against the overwhelming power of the construct. Ethan had no choice. He pulled his weapon, a railgun sidearm designed to punch through starship hulls, and fired point-blank into the warform's exposed joint. The impact tore through metal, sending shockwaves of energy cascading through its system. Sparks erupted as the warform's grip slackened, dropping Darius to the floor. Then it staggered, its optics flickering. For the first time, it paused. Ethan didn't wait. He grabbed Darius by the arm, hauling him back. We need to move. Varric didn't need to be told twice. He barked orders to his surviving soldiers. Fall back. The warform's optics flickered again, its systems recalculating. But before it could resume the fight, something deep within the facility groaned. The walls trembled. The ceiling fractured. A deafening alarm blared through the ruins. Kaler's voice crackled through the broken comms. Commander, the warform. It's waking more of them. Ethan froze. Varric's mandibles clicked in horror. There are more. A second warform's optics flickered to life somewhere in the distance. Then a third. Ethan's jaw tightened. Yeah, he said grimly. And we just pissed them off. The ruins rumbled, and in the darkness, more eyes began to glow. The ground shook beneath them, dust and debris cascading from the ceiling, as the ancient facility awoke. The warform that had nearly killed them was still rebooting, its flickering optics trying to reestablish control over its damaged systems. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was the other warforms. More red eyes began flickering to life in the darkness, their massive frames shifting as they pulled themselves free from their containment chambers. Ancient sentinels, long dormant, now stirring once more. Their bodies hummed with the same eerie blue energy, and the deep mechanical rumble of their systems rebooting echoed through the vast underground chamber. Varric's throat tightened. His soldiers were already scrambling, their previous confidence shattered. The Dominion had conquered worlds, had subjugated species across the stars. But standing here, in this forgotten ruin of Earth's past, Varric knew with absolute certainty. This was beyond them. Ethan's golden eyes scanned the warforms, his mind racing. There was no fighting this. Not now. We need to get out of here. Darius coughed, pushing himself up, still shaken from the warform's grip. His enhanced body had saved him, but even he had limits. What's the plan, boss? Ethan's jaw tightened. We run. Kara stirred, groaning as she tried to move. Her cybernetic arm was malfunctioning, sparks sputtering from the exposed servos where the warform's blast had struck her. But she forced herself up, breathing hard. Running, she muttered. Sounds good. The warforms fully activated. The facility's dim emergency lighting flashed, illuminating the true scale of their awakening. 10. No. 12. More than a dozen warforms were emerging from the shadows, their towering frames seamless, a perfect fusion of machine and something far more advanced. A deep mechanical voice resonated through the chamber. Hostile entities detected. Initiating total containment protocol. The walls shifted. Metallic plates descended, sealing off potential exits. The warforms didn't just wake up. They were locking the facility down. Varric's mandibles clicked in panic. We're trapped. Ethan's head snapped toward him. Not yet. With a single motion, he grabbed Varric by the arm, pulling him forward. You wanted to see Earth's secrets. Congratulations. Now you get to run for your life with us. Varric didn't argue. He ran. Ethan's squad followed, moving fast, their enhanced bodies allowing them to sprint through the collapsing structure with inhuman speed. The Xilari weren't as fast. Varric's soldiers struggled to keep up, but fear drove them forward. Behind them, the first warform moved. It was no longer sluggish. Its rebooting sequence had completed, and now it pursued with terrifying efficiency. The others followed. 12 unstoppable titans chasing them through the ruins. Darius smashed his fist into a control panel as they ran, trying to override the facility's lockdown. Sparks burst from the console, but it wasn't enough. The warforms were overriding everything. A heavy blast roared past them. One of the warforms had fired some kind of energy pulse, and it hit just behind them. The force sent Varric and 2 of his soldiers tumbling forward, their bodies slamming into the ground. Ethan skidded to a stop, grabbing Varric by the back of his armor and hauling him up like he weighed nothing. Move. Varric's soldiers weren't so lucky. The warforms were on them before they could stand. The first was crushed instantly. A massive metal foot came down, obliterating the Xilari under its weight. The second tried to crawl away, but a warform's massive arm shot out, grabbing him mid-scream. Varric didn't look back. Neither did Ethan. Ahead, a corridor split into 2 paths. One was already sealing shut, massive blast doors descending. The other led deeper into the ruins. We won't make it to the surface, Kara gritted out, her damaged arm dragging slightly as she ran. They're cutting us off. Ethan scanned their options. Then we go down. Darius huffed. Down. That's the opposite of out. We don't have a choice. They took the descending path just as the warforms reached the corridor behind them. Plasma fire rained down, scorching the walls as the titans pursued. The corridor twisted into a spiral staircase, ancient, rusted, yet still intact. They moved fast, but the warforms didn't need stairs. One of them leaped down the center of the shaft, crashing through multiple levels, its metal frame smashing into the lower platform. The force buckled the floor beneath them, and the entire staircase shuddered, beginning to collapse. Ethan barely grabbed Kara in time, yanking her away from the edge before the metal gave out beneath them. They fell. The whole team plunged into darkness as the floor disappeared under them. For a brief, weightless moment, there was only silence. Then, impact. Ethan hit the ground and rolled, his enhanced body absorbing the shock. He heard Kara curse nearby, heard Darius groan in pain, and Varric land with a dull thud. They were alive, but barely. The warforms were still above, repositioning, searching for a new way down. Ethan blinked, adjusting to the darkness. His enhanced vision slowly focused, and what he saw made his stomach drop. They weren't in just another corridor. They had fallen into something far older than the facility above. The walls here weren't metal. They were stone, ancient, covered in human script. The floor was lined with symbols, glowing faintly as if reacting to their presence. Varric pushed himself up, coughing. His eyes widened as he looked around. What is this place? Ethan didn't answer. He recognized the symbols. This wasn't part of the facility. This was older than the warforms, older than the defenses, older than anything that Xilari had ever seen. Kara exhaled. Ethan, what is this? Ethan ran his fingers over one of the carvings. His breath was slow, measured. This, he said quietly, was never meant to be found. A low hum filled the air. The symbols pulsed brighter. Something deep beneath them shifted. And above, the warforms had found a way down. Dust settled as the team pulled themselves from the rubble. Faint blue symbols flickered across the walls, casting a soft glow over the chamber. Ethan's breath was steady, but his muscles were tense. This place was wrong. It didn't feel like the rest of the facility. Varric's mandibles clicked as he surveyed the ancient carvings, his mind struggling to make sense of the language etched into the stone. This wasn't Xilari. It wasn't Dominion script. It was something older. Darius groaned, rolling onto his side. Well, that was a hell of a fall. He winced, checking his ribs. I think I cracked something. Kara pushed herself up, her cybernetic arms sparking. She barely reacted, her attention locked onto the symbols pulsing beneath their feet. This isn't just another room, she muttered. This is something else. Ethan touched the wall. The surface rippled, reacting to his presence. He pulled his hand back immediately. Varric's throat tightened. What is this place? Ethan didn't answer at first. He just stared at the symbols, his golden eyes scanning every carved inscription. He had seen these before, in the old records, in the buried histories that no outsider was ever supposed to read. This wasn't part of the warform facility. This was far older, and far more dangerous. A deep metallic thud echoed above them. The warforms were still coming, searching for a way down. Their heavy footfalls reverberated through the ruins, shaking dust from the ceiling. They're not stopping, Kara said, flexing her injured arm. They'll find a way in soon. Darius exhaled sharply. So what? We just keep running. We don't even know what this place is. Ethan finally turned, his voice quiet but firm. This is a tomb. Varric stiffened. A tomb. Ethan nodded. He motioned toward the symbols on the walls. These markings, they tell a story. His fingers traced one of the carvings. A long time ago, before the warforms, before Earth fell silent, something was locked away here. Varric's mandibles twitched. Something worse than those things. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he kept reading, his eyes narrowing. The inscriptions weren't just warnings. They were seals. This entire place was built to keep something contained. Above them, the warforms were rerouting power, using the facility's systems to burn through the stone barriers. Sparks rained down as giant metal claws started tearing through the ceiling. They had minutes, maybe less, before the machines found them. Kara clenched her jaw. We can't stay here. Ethan turned back to the chamber. His mind raced. The warforms weren't going to stop. They were relentless, adaptive. They would keep coming, no matter what. Unless something stopped them. His eyes locked onto the center of the chamber. A massive, circular structure sat in the middle of the floor, covered in intricate engravings. It looked like a sarcophagus, but far more advanced. And it was sealed shut. Darius followed his gaze and immediately shook his head. Oh no, I know that look. Don't even think about it. Kara's brow furrowed. You think whatever's in there can help us. Ethan hesitated. He didn't know, but he did know one thing. This tomb wasn't built by the Xilari, or the Dominion, or even Earth's past civilizations. This was something else, and if the warforms were still afraid of it, even after all these centuries, that meant it was powerful enough to matter. Varric took a cautious step back. This is madness. We don't even know what's inside. Darius groaned. That's the whole damn problem. We're about to wake up something that an ancient civilization thought was dangerous enough to bury beneath the planet. A massive chunk of stone collapsed from the ceiling as the warforms tore deeper into the ruins. Ethan didn't have time to argue. He moved, his hands pressed against the sarcophagus, feeling the energy thrumming beneath the surface. The ancient seals were still active, but barely. Centuries of containment had weakened them. With a deep breath, he pushed. The seals flashed, reacting violently. Energy crackled through the chamber, the walls trembling as if resisting his touch. A deep mechanical voice, not from the warforms, but from the tomb itself, spoke in an ancient tongue. Varric's translator barely caught fragments of the message. Containment breach. Warning. Primary Guardian override required. The warforms above stopped tearing at the ceiling. For the first time, they hesitated. Then they moved faster. They weren't just hunting them anymore. They were trying to stop them. Ethan gritted his teeth. Too late. The sarcophagus shuddered, metal groaning as the seals began to break. The air grew heavy, pressure building as if the room itself was holding its breath. Then, a hiss of escaping air, a low, resonant rumble, and the tomb opened. A figure lay within. Tall, humanoid, but not quite human. Its form was sleek, covered in armor so advanced that even Ethan couldn't recognize its design. Its chest rose and fell, slow and deliberate. It was alive. Then its eyes opened. A deep, glowing gold, brighter than any human's. The figure exhaled, the motion almost human, but the energy radiating from it was anything but. Ethan took a step back, instincts screaming at him. The figure's gaze swept across the room, locking onto the warforms above. The massive constructs had paused, their systems hesitating. For the first time, the warforms spoke with something resembling fear. Primary Guardian detected. Emergency override engage. Disengaging hostilities. One by one, the warforms froze, their optics dimming slightly. Varric's breath caught in his throat. They stopped. The awakened figure slowly sat up, its head tilting slightly as it examined the chamber. Then it turned its gaze to Ethan. Its voice, when it spoke, was deep, ancient, and filled with something Ethan couldn't quite name. "Who has awakened me?" Ethan swallowed hard. "We didn't have a choice." The figure studied him for a long moment. Then, almost casually, it swung its legs over the edge of the sarcophagus and stood. Even Darius, enhanced as he was, felt small in its presence. The Guardian looked toward the frozen warforms, then back at Ethan. Then it did something none of them expected. It smiled, and in that moment, Ethan realized something horrifying. The warforms weren't trying to stop them out of aggression. They were trying to stop them out of fear. Because whatever they had just woken up was worse. The chamber was silent. The warforms, once relentless in their pursuit, stood frozen. Their optics dimmed, their towering frames locked in place as if waiting for some unseen command. The figure that had emerged from the sarcophagus, the Guardian, stood tall, its golden eyes scanning the room with a gaze that felt both ancient and impossibly sharp. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. The air felt heavier, charged with something he couldn't name. His team stood tense behind him. Darius's fists clenched. Kara's damaged cybernetic arm twitched. Even Varric, always so sure of himself, looked shaken. The Guardian turned its gaze toward Ethan, studying him with an unreadable expression. "Your kind," it said, its voice deep and smooth, "is not meant to be here." Ethan swallowed but didn't back down. "Neither are they." He motioned toward the warforms. The Guardian's glowing eyes flickered as it shifted its attention. The machines did not react. They remained still, locked in some kind of override state. The Guardian took a step forward, and with that simple motion, the warform's optics dimmed further, as if in submission. Varric's mandibles clicked in disbelief. What are you?" The Guardian barely spared him a glance. "I am what was left behind." Ethan took a slow breath. Left behind to do what? The Guardian regarded him for a long moment before answering. To ensure that Earth's true purpose remained undisturbed. A sharp chill ran through Ethan's spine. True purpose. The Guardian's gaze darkened. Your world was never just a home. It was a vault, a fortress, a warning. It turned, gesturing toward the walls. where ancient inscriptions pulsed faintly with energy. And these machines were never its true defenders. They were its jailers. The warforms remained silent, their once hostile presence reduced to nothing more than statues in the presence of the Guardian. Kara exhaled sharply. So, what were they keeping locked away? The Guardian looked at her, and this time, there was something almost human in its gaze. Not quite sadness, not quite regret, something in between. The last remnant of a war that should have ended eons ago, it said. The last survivor of a people who should never have existed. Darius stiffened. You? The Guardian nodded. Ethan's mind raced. You're saying they weren't protecting Earth. They were keeping you locked away. The Guardian's expression didn't change. I was not meant to wake. Above them, the structure groaned. The damage from the warforms' assault had weakened the ceiling, and deep cracks began spreading through the stone. The facility was starting to collapse. Ethan clenched his jaw. They didn't have time for mysteries. Look, I don't care what the warforms were trying to do. We need to get out of here. The Guardian tilted its head slightly, as if considering something. Then it spoke again. No, you need to leave. I must stay. Varric scoffed. You expect us to just leave you here? The Guardian finally smiled again. This time, there was something almost amused in it. You misunderstand, alien. I was here long before you, and I will remain long after. Ethan exhaled, forcing himself to focus. If you are so powerful, can you stop them? The warforms. The Guardian turned toward the machines, studying them like one might study insects. They are shackled by old orders, orders that no longer matter. I am not their enemy. A low rumble sounded overhead. The warforms, though frozen, were still receiving commands from somewhere. Even if they couldn't act now, something out there was still trying to reassert control. Ethan stepped forward. Then come with us. If they weren't the real threat, if they were just guards, then what the hell were they afraid of? The Guardian's golden gaze met his, and for the first time, Ethan saw something behind those eyes. Not power, not calculation, hesitation. And that terrified him. The ceiling shook violently, debris crashing down as the facility's structural integrity gave way. The warforms, despite their frozen state, started to reactivate, their systems struggling against the override, their bodies twitching as if something far worse was waking up. The Guardian's expression darkened. It turned away from Ethan and raised a hand toward the warforms. A pulse of golden energy rippled outward, washing over them like a silent command. And then they collapsed. Every single warform, once unstoppable, shut down instantly. Their massive frames crashed into the ground, lifeless. Their optics dimmed completely, their internal cores drained of all energy. Kara exhaled in disbelief. You just turned them off. The Guardian didn't answer. It staggered slightly, its form flickering for the briefest moment, like a machine running on borrowed power. Ethan saw it. He understood. The Guardian wasn't just old. It was dying. The sarcophagus hadn't just been a prison. It had been keeping it alive. Darius noticed it too. You're not at full strength, are you? The Guardian exhaled. I have enough. Varric stepped back, his eyes darting toward the fallen warforms. Enough for what? The Guardian turned toward him. To ensure that when you leave this place, you never return. Ethan's stomach dropped. You're going to bring it all down. The Guardian nodded. This world has slept for eons, and it must remain asleep. Kara clenched her jaw. You can't just bury it all again. The Dominion already found this place once. They'll find it again. The Guardian regarded her for a long moment. Then, finally, it spoke. Not if there is nothing left to find. The ground trembled violently. The ruins around them began to collapse in earnest. The Guardian's hands lifted slightly, and a pulse of golden energy surged through the chamber, traveling upward into the facility above. And then, a deafening roar. The entire structure began to cave in. Ethan barely had time to react. Run. His team sprinted toward the nearest tunnel, dodging falling debris as the ancient tomb collapsed around them. Varric and his remaining soldiers followed, scrambling for their lives. Behind them, the Guardian stood unmoving, watching them go. The last thing Ethan saw before the dust consumed the chamber was the golden glow of its eyes, calm and unwavering. Then, darkness. They ran, lungs burning, navigating through the crumbling ruins as the ground beneath them split apart. Seconds felt like hours. Then, finally, light. They burst into the open, stumbling onto the ruined surface of Earth. The sky was dark, clouds thick with the smoke of the collapsing facility. They turned back just in time to see the entire structure implode, sinking into the planet itself. The Earth swallowed the ruins, dust and rock sealing the tomb forever. Silence followed. The warforms were gone. The Guardian was gone. And so were the last remnants of whatever Earth had once been. Varric stared at the destruction, his voice hollow. So that's it. It's just over? Ethan watched the dust settle. His hands clenched. No, he said quietly. Darius glanced at him. Then what? Ethan exhaled, his gaze still locked on the ruins. The Dominion will come back. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But they will. Kara nodded grimly. And when they do, Ethan's golden eyes flickered with something unreadable. Then we make damn sure they never wake Earth's defenders again.